is in the District Court of Oklahoma County, State of Oklahoma, the State of Oklahoma versus Daniel K. Holtzclaw, case number CF 2014-5869. Verdict, count 1, sexual battery. We, the jury, impaneled and sworn in the above entitled cause, do upon our oaths find as follows. The defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and set punishment at 8 years. Count 8. Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy and punishment is set at 20 years. Count 10. Forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy and punishment is set at 16 years. Count 11. Rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 12. Count 13. Sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 14. Sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 15. Count 28. Rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 29. Rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 32. Rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree and punishment is set at 30 years. Let me ask the jury, is this your verdict, so say you all? Yes. Counsel, would you like to examine the verdict forms?
Not to say.
No, Your Honor. All right. Mr. Holtzclaw, you and your attorneys to come forward. Mr. Holtzclaw, this jury finds you guilty of the various counts. You will be remanded to the custody of the Oklahoma County Sheriff for formal sentencing set January 21st, 2016 at 10 o'clock a.m. All right, you have a seat.
Six Philly police officers are facing serious criminal charges after there was some evidence indicating that they did really bad illegal things. Let me give you some examples. Between 2006 and 2012, the officers are being charged with beating, kidnapping, and stealing more than $500,000 in drugs, cash, and property from suspects. Now, these are specifically cops that are working for the narcotics unit, so they would do raids without warrants. They say the charges against them include stories of dangling suspects from balconies, locking them in hotel rooms, beating them as officers kept score on who could inflict the most debilitating injuries, and underreporting seizures of money and drugs. So let's say they were in a situation where they were able to obtain $64,000 worth of money, drug money, they would only report like $7,000. So what happened to the rest of it? Now, 5 of the officers are facing life in prison if they are convicted on 26 of these charges. The 6th cop, John Spicer, faces about 40 years behind bars.
Former Houston police officer breaks down in tears after learning his sentence. In an unprecedented sentence for a Houston officer, the jury handed Abraham Joseph life in prison.
Convicted of rape, many were shocked.
The jury had a wide range of options. The defense asking for as little as probation, prosecutors asking for life in prison. And the jury gave Abraham Joseph the latter, stunning everyone in the courtroom, but most certainly the accused.
Assess his punishment at confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for life.
Abraham Joseph stood stunned, then stared at each member of the jury. His wife collapsed in the arms of another family member, and then the ex-cop and convicted rapist began to cry. But if he was shocked, his attorney was not.
I'm not surprised by the sentence in light of the accusations that came out in punishment.
After he was convicted of 2 forced sex acts on a cantina waitress in January of last year, the jury heard testimony from 4 more women who say they were his victims too, that he used his role as a cop to force illegal immigrants to have sex by threatening them with arrest or deportation.
What he was doing out there, he would have continued to do had it not been for the one victim that came forward in this case.
Abraham Joseph is now in the Harris County Jail awaiting transfer to a state prison, and he's looking for a new attorney to help him with his appeal.
New tonight, 3 jail guards find themselves on the other side of a jail cell accused of murder. The Santa Clara sheriff says they killed 31-year-old Michael Tyree, a homeless, mentally ill inmate, last week. He was found naked on the floor of his cell in the San Jose jail, covered in feces and vomit. The sheriff called his death violent and cowardly. Tyree was in the final day of his 5-day sentence for petty theft. He was waiting to be sent to a mental health facility.
Hey, Roseanne, they've been charged with felony perjury, accused of providing false testimony and lying about how they handled a drug bust in Glenview. This dash cam video holds all the evidence. It shows police pulling over a man in 2013. He's immediately handcuffed. Then officers take him to the back of the squad car before searching the car and finding drugs. Officers testified in court that they saw a pound of marijuana just lying openly in the back seat in plain view, and that is why they arrested him. A judge said the video proves the officers lied and called their testimony outrageous. Charged with perjury are Chicago Police Sergeant James Padar, Chicago Police Officer William Pruenti, Chicago Police Officer Vince Morgan, and Glenview Police Officer James Horn. Last year, that man successfully sued the 4 officers. He and his lawyer shared why.
They said that when they approached Joe, they asked him some questions. They asked him if he had any drugs. According to the police, Joe said, yes, we have drugs in the back. According to them, they then took Joe to the back, searched the car with his permission, according to the police, whereupon they saw the drugs lying in plain view.
If it could happen to me, it could honestly happen to anybody. And I just happen to be one of the lucky few that has a video that proves that they were wrong.
All drug charges were dropped against Sperling. The 4 officers are expected to appear in bond court today.
A Milwaukee police officer is headed to prison for his part in the Frank Jude beating. A judge this afternoon sentenced Joseph Stromey to 2 years in prison.
Now, Joseph Stromey was off duty and admittedly drunk at that Bayview house party where Frank Jude was beaten. And Stromey was never found to have taken part in the beating, but struck a deal with federal prosecutors after admitting that he lied to investigators and under oath during the state trial about the actions of other officers.
Joseph Stromey had faced a maximum of 10 years in prison for obstruction of justice, but because he had agreed to testify against other officers, federal prosecutors recommended just 1 year. The judge, however, saw it differently, making the sentence 2 years, in part, he said, because Stromey never apologized to Jude.
This is the first sentencing of any of the former officers connected with the Frank Jude case, and Judge Charles Clavert doubled the amount of prison time which the prosecution had recommended, saying there has to be a sentence in this case that reflects the sentiments of the community. Toya.
The former Metro officer who ordered women to expose themselves during traffic stops asked for mercy.
But John Norman didn't get any sympathy from the judge. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison today.
But if I did at any point make anyone feel threatened, I truly and humbly am sorry, because that was never my intent.
Former Metro officer John Norman turned his head and even looked at one of the victims in the courtroom as he pleaded with the judge for a more lenient sentence.
I was angry, and I said, "You're such a liar," in my head. "You're full of it, because you knew what you were doing the whole time you were doing it. You know your intentions. You just kept getting away with it, and you thought you could get away with it again."
Norman pleaded guilty to oppression under color of office. In other words, abusing his power, and open or gross lewdness. The case involves forcing women to expose their breasts after he pulled them over. 2 women made statements on the witness stand, imploring the judge to be as firm as possible in her punishment. They both want him to be a sex offender for life.
For the rest of his life, wherever he goes, it's going to stick with him.
One woman says she has panic attacks now. The other is afraid to be stopped by male officers.
I'm afraid, especially if I'm alone. I'll have to call backup or stay on the phone 911 until somebody else comes, because I don't trust.
After hearing everyone's statements, Judge Abby Silver had no sympathy for John Norman. In fact, she looked right at him and said, "You are nothing short of a sexual predator with a badge." Norman received the maximum sentence of 1 year for each count, adding up to 2 years. He was quickly led away in handcuffs as 2 women left the courtroom feeling grateful.
I said in my head, "Thank you."
That's exactly what I was saying.
Thank you, God. Thank you. Thank you.
County Sheriff's deputy is off the job tonight after being found passed out in his patrol car on New Year's Eve. Investigators suspect he may have been under the influence of something, and the focus is on some kind of drug. Tonight, we've learned that deputy was arrested and let go.
Well, can you imagine just how disturbing this would be? Frightening for somebody to be walking along and see a deputy slumped over the wheel, knocking on the window trying to get him to wake up, and you can't wake him up. The police are not saying much about this case, just giving us the bare minimum, but we do know sheriff's deputies arrested one of their own right here last night.
Obtained a letter from Sheriff John Urquhart to his staff, which reads, "Unfortunately, a King County Sheriff's Office deputy was arrested on New Year's Eve for physical control. Alcohol did not appear to be the issue, but drugs most likely were." We're told the deputy was arrested by Bellevue officers last night after he was eventually awakened. A drug recognition expert determined there was sufficient evidence the officer, a 46-year-old, 15-year veteran of the sheriff's office, was under the influence of some type of narcotic.
Now he's on paid administrative leave and will have a lot of questions to answer.
Good evening to you. Our top story tonight. A Haskell police officer has been fired after being arrested for multiple charges, including sexual assault.
Channel 7 Stacey Spivey with reaction up front tonight from the community.
Line this highway in Haskell as kids get out of their second day of school. Right across the street, the Haskell Police Department. Their officers helping direct traffic.
We put our safety in this department over here across the street, and I'm just glad it was found out as quick as it was.
On Monday, one of those officers arrested for sexual assault involving a juvenile. 32-year-old Kyle Vaughn also facing 2 child pornography charges.
I think it's horrible what he's done. I don't think he has the right to be around any children.
This grandparent telling Channel 7 she saw Vaughn directing traffic for Harmony Grove schools. Now uncomfortable knowing her 2 grandchildren were around him.
Terrifying to know that you put your trust in the law enforcement and they're out here protecting your kids, but you wonder exactly how much they are protecting them.
SWAT team members fan out across the valley looking for drug and human smuggling suspects. And they find 3 people working for the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And they say they were involved. Kelly Hessedal has this surprising story tonight.
That a deputy sheriff would provide information and associate with these drug and human traffickers is despicable.
It was a tip they received about a year ago that blew open a major crime ring. Deputy Alfredo Navarrete, a former member of the anti-human smuggling unit, now behind bars, facing charges. He tipped off drug kingpins on crime sweeps and even helped smuggle illegal immigrants to California. His home was one of 16 buildings raided today. Inside, deputies found 2 illegal immigrants.
Well, let me say something. We did not know for sure until today, when he admitted passing information on to the drug traffickers. But you always have to be aware that could happen, whether you're investigating a crooked cop or not. You always have to be concerned about leaks.
2 of his co-workers, detention officers Sylvia Najera and Marcela Hernandez, also arrested today for similar crimes. Sheriff Arpaio tells us Hernandez was even living with a major drug kingpin and pregnant with his child.
No one's above the law, and apparently no one is beyond the reach of drug trafficking organizations in Mexico. So we must remain ever vigilant.
MCSO says the investigation is far from over. 7 other employees are now under the microscope.
An update to the breaking news we brought you. Henry County Sheriff Frank Castle and 19 others, including sheriff's deputies, have been arrested. This is a news conference with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We expect to hear from U.S. Attorney John Brownlee. Let's listen in live.
This week, a federal grand jury for the Western District of Virginia returned a 48-count indictment charging 20 individuals, including 13 current and former members of the Henry County Sheriff's Office, a former probation officer for Henry County, and a former employee of the United States Postal Service with multiple violations of federal law, including racketeering, illegal narcotics trafficking, theft of firearms, possession of stolen firearms, money laundering, making false statements, perjury, and obstruction of justice. According to the 48-count indictment, since 1998, sworn officers, employees, and associates of Henry County Sheriff's Office engaged in a continuous scheme to steal illegal drugs, firearms, and contraband from the seized evidence property room. The defendants took cocaine, crack cocaine, marijuana, and firearms, and then sold the stolen drugs and guns back into our community. The grand jury has also alleged that several of the defendants stole seized firearms and other contraband for their own personal use. The grand jury has alleged that 7 of the charged defendants, including 4 former Henry County deputies, conspired to commit multiple acts of racketeering. The grand jury has alleged that 6 of the defendants, including 4 former deputies, conspired to illegally distribute ketamine and steroids. In addition, Carlton Riley, a former probation officer for Henry County, has been charged with illegally participating in a cocaine deal. The grand jury has alleged that 13 of the defendants, including 8 current and former members of the Henry County Sheriff's Office, lied to federal agents and to the grand jury, encouraged others to lie to federal agents and to the grand jury, and obstructed the investigation. Now I'd like to give a brief summary of how the investigation started. On March 4th, 2005, agents from the Philadelphia office of the DEA notified DEA agents in Roanoke that an express mail package containing 2 kilograms of ketamine was being delivered to a residence in Martinsville, Virginia. Ketamine is commonly used as a date rape drug. DEA agents made a controlled delivery of the ketamine to the Martinsville home and arrested William Randall Reed. Officials charged Reed with illegal possession with the intent to distribute ketamine. Reed agreed to cooperate and told investigators that the home where the drugs were delivered was a rental property owned by James Alden Vaught, who was at the time a sergeant with the Henry County Sheriff's Office. Reed said that he paid Vaught in both cash and ketamine to use the residence as his drug drop. Reed also said he helped Vaught sell 2 kilograms of stolen cocaine that Vaught had seized from a drug dealer while on duty with the Henry County Sheriff's Office. Reed said that a deputy with the Henry County Sheriff's Office by the name of Brad Martin had also been jointly using and selling ketamine and steroids for nearly 8 years. Once confronted with this information, Sergeant James Vaught resigned from the Henry County Sheriff's Office in March of 2005 and agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. As a part of the investigation, Vaught spoke to investigators about his role in these offenses, and he also agreed to covertly record conversations with many of the listed defendants in the indictment. Vaught confirmed the allegations made by William Reed and also revealed that the rental property in Martinsville was used by several officers as a place for extramarital sexual relations. Vaught further confessed that he, Deputy Brad Martin, and Deputy David King engaged in several illegal transactions involving the distribution of cocaine, crack cocaine, marijuana, and steroids. The grand jury has alleged that David King, who was once the supervisor for the Vice Unit and a school resource officer for the Henry County Sheriff's Office, illegally took drugs seized by the Sheriff's Office and then falsified destruction orders for the drugs. The stolen drugs were then sold to Wilbert Brown, Ronald Trantham, William Reed, and others. It is estimated that multiple kilograms of cocaine, ounces of crack cocaine, and hundreds of pounds of marijuana were stolen by these officers and then resold for further illegal distribution. Also, the canine handler for the Henry County Sheriff's Office, Walter Hairston, periodically received seized narcotics in order to train the county's drug-smelling dogs. The grand jury has alleged that on approximately 10 occasions, Hairston took the seized cocaine and marijuana and, rather than using it for legitimate training purposes, gave the drugs to Vaught, who then gave it to others for further illegal distribution. According to the indictment, Cornelia Cox, Major James Keaton, David King, and Patrick Martin stole firearms, money, electronic equipment, illegal drugs, and other items from evidence that had been seized by the Henry County Sheriff's Office. It is further charged that Robert Adams, Wilbert Brown, Harold Franklin Castle, Cornelia Cox, Candy DeShazo, Walter Hairston, James Keaton, David King, Stephen Preston, and Ronald Trantham attempted to obstruct the federal investigation in several ways. All of these defendants made false statements to federal agents, and some encouraged others to make false statements. When called upon to testify before the grand jury, at least one of the defendants lied under oath. In addition, a few of the defendants disclosed sensitive law enforcement information to their co-conspirators in order for them to avoid detection and arrest. And finally, all of the current and former members of the Sheriff's Office violated their oaths as law enforcement officers by ignoring and condoning illegal activities. On one instance, in 2001, a DEA agent from Texas called the Henry County Sheriff's Office to advise them that a drug ledger had been seized that indicated shipments of illegal drugs were being delivered to one Brad Martin in Martinsville, Virginia. The DEA agents in Texas did not realize that Brad Martin was a deputy with Henry County. Brad Martin took the call and shared this information with his fellow deputies, David King and James Vaught. The grand jury has also alleged that Sheriff Castle was advised of this illegal activity and chose not to take any action. The grand jury has also alleged that Sheriff Castle was advised of various illegal activities involving the Henry County Sheriff's deputies. These illegal activities included the distribution of 2 kilograms of cocaine by Vaught and others, the embezzlement of money by Vaught, and the use of steroids by several members of the Henry County Sheriff's Office. The grand jury alleged that Sheriff Castle covered up these illegal activities by not pursuing investigations and by agreeing to pass on sensitive law enforcement information to the offending parties. In this way, Castle assisted these defendants in avoiding detection and arrest. The grand jury also alleged that Castle made false statements to federal investigators and attempted to aid James Vaught in a money laundering scheme to disguise the source of money represented to have been derived from the distribution of cocaine. As to the money laundering charge, the grand jury has alleged that on February 24, 2006, Sheriff Castle attempted to help Vaught give $10,000 of known drug proceeds the appearance of legitimacy by co-signing for a loan for Vaught so that Vaught could launder the drug money. Castle counseled Vaught to deposit small amounts of the drug money into a checking account to pay off the loan. In addition, the grand jury has alleged that Castle agreed with Vaught never to mention the existence of the drug money and then lied to federal investigators saying he knew nothing about Vaught's illegal drug activities.